Welcome to the next episode of the Leadership Lab. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Stephen Carter, Group CEO of Informa. Stephen, welcome.
Really nice to be here.
We talk a lot with our scholars about leadership being a journey, not a destination. Can you share a little bit about where it all began for you?
Well, I certainly agree it's a journey. It's time and experience as much as anything else. It's difficult to learn leadership in an academic sense, although you can study it. I would say life learning starts probably in your family. And for me, that probably was a mixture of my father and my broader family. My first leadership responsibility in any meaningful sense was when I was at university. I did that thing that is popular, and I think the idea originated in Scottish universities of doing a sabbatical year as the president of the Students' Union. And there suddenly you have budgets and decisions to make, and you're sitting on university senates and having to have opinions on things you really don't know much about. And then I got into work, and largely because of the dynamism and change that was going on in the British economy at that point in time, got responsibility at an early age. So there you're in the sink or swim part of the journey. But
you were really young though, weren't you, when you became UK CEO of J. Walter Thompson? You were in your early 30s.
I was.
What led to such a rapid rise, do you think?
Timing. It genuinely was timing. The business was changing a lot. The corporate structure had changed. So the company that I joined had been bought by another company. So there was quite a lot of change and turnover. I had gone into business. I'd ended up sort of working in and around business development, and at that moment in time had turned out to be quite good at it. And as we all know now in business, if you can bring in the revenue, then that's always a useful skill. And then I had 2 or 3 generous mentors who were willing to take a bit of a risk. So it was a mixture of things.
What do you think they saw in you that made them want to help your career?
Well, I wanted it. I always say that's a big thing. Don't underestimate. We used to say in pitches in the old days, remember at the end of the pitch, just to say to the person on the other side of the table, just so you know, we really want this business.
So you have to be ready to ask.
You have to be able to ask. And I think it's a bit the same in opportunity in work. I mean, particularly if you're giving someone a challenging job, you want to know they really want it, because if you're the person giving the job, you know that quite a bit of the job is going to be really very difficult. So you don't want to give someone a job they don't really want. So they probably sensed that I wanted it.
So you were ambitious?
Yeah, 100%. If you'd met my 30-year-old self, you would have said, I used to say in those days, if you'd met me, I was running on a mixture of ambition, adrenaline, maybe a little bit of alcohol and nicotine, and not a small dose of arrogance. But I've given up some of those things. I'll leave you to judge which. But yeah, so I wanted it. I was ambitious.
You just said that you have to be willing to do hard things. Your next role was at NTL, wasn't it? Again, very young and in a huge, almost crisis moment for them.
It became crisis. It wasn't when I moved. When I moved, it had, everything in life is timing. My timing wasn't so good then, but it was during the early stages of the internet, the dot-com boom, so-called. But then came the bust, and I joined just literally as the boom peaked.
Ouch.
We went, definitely, the holding company went into crisis mode. And as a factual matter, went to Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceedings in the United States of America, which, I just about knew how to spell when I discovered it. And then I lived it for 18 months. And that was a learning experience with a capital L and E, for sure.
What do you think you learned most from going through that?
Oh, so many things. In a leadership role, I probably learned that in crisis more than anything else, the thing that matters is constant communications. Because when your team or your business is facing extreme uncertainty, the context changes all the time. So context really matters. And the only way, at the time, I think the company employed about 26,000 people in the United Kingdom. So by the end of the process, I think we employed about 12. So it was a lot of change in a very, very short period of time. So I learned the importance of transparency, accuracy, constant communications. I learned the big difference between how business gets done in the US and the UK, because the operating business was in the UK, the listing was in the US. Two countries divided by certainly, different systems.
And what were those big differences?
The US market is, I would say, it's more in a good way, and maybe sometimes in a bad way. It's more rules based, whereas the UK system is more interpretive. That's true in accounting, SOX versus IFRS. It's true, I think, in the legal system. It's true in business, actually. There's a rapidity and ruthlessness to the US market, which is, like all things, it's good and bad. The UK market is a little bit more measured. And then the financing structures, well, they're just the scale of the market, the depth of the capital pools, and the business that owned the company I was running, had used debt largely to grow the company. And that's okay when money's cheap and equities are high, but when money's expensive and equities are low, you're in a whole disaster. It's a disaster. You're in a whole different world. So I learned a lot about the challenge of leaving yourself overexposed to the debt market. It's not something I've ever repeated.
And did you know about all of the HR implications of a restructure before it sort of landed on you?
I mean, I'd done a restructuring before, but in a different business and in a different environment. So no, at that scale, at that intensity, it was a full-on, full-body contact sport.
And how did you get up to speed, and how did you handle the stress?
I got up to speed, had a great team. And generally, I would say that I definitely learned back at WPP, the teaming is a big thing. Talent is one thing, teams are another. I said that last time, actually. I'm a Chelsea fan. I watched Chelsea get beaten by Arsenal 3-2 in the first leg of the Carabao Cup semi-final, and we had a lot of talent on the pitch, but it wasn't evident that there was a team there.
Yep.
I had a very good team. I had a great HR director, actually, really, really strong, and a very, very good CFO, which you really needed in that process.
From there, you went to Brunswick.
No, there I went to government.
Oh, did you? Oh, of course. And that was another major program of restructure.
Definitely was.
Yeah. And
I had a lot more experience by then in restructure.
Didn't you have 5 agencies that you were
Six
that you were bringing together? How did you create a cohesive culture from 6 different individual bodies?
Well, we started with a very clear mandate for change. Everybody really wanted change. The market wanted change. Consumers wanted change. There was a lot of change going on. Technology was moving at a pace. Not to besmirch the 6 individual agencies and bodies which in periods of time had good work. They were past their sell-by date, and everyone sort of knew that. Tony Blair had just been elected. He had a massive majority. He had a mandate for change. There had been a lot of thought that had gone into. And part of the reason why I ended up doing the job or getting the job was I'd been involved in some of the think tank work that had been done that said, look, the creative and technology industries, if we're going to be a world player, we've got to do this differently. So there was quite a lot of, shared understanding in the system that this was not a moment to be incremental. This was a moment for structural change. And then we came up with a plan where we said Ofcom would not be a government entity. It would be independent of government. So structurally, it was a statutory corporation. So in the public sector, you've got government departments, government agencies, non-departmental government bodies, and. Yeah. The furthest thing from government that isn't quite a private sector entity is technically called a statutory company, a statutory corporation.
And that's what you were?
Yeah, it was one of my conditions. I'll take this job on 3 or 4 conditions. One of them is, in legal form, we have to be a statutory corporation, which means you're completely independent of government. You're self-funded. You can raise levies from the industry. You can appoint your own people. You have your own pay scales. You have a board. You're about as independent as you can be, other than not being a listed company. So we had independence. That was enshrined in our creation. And then we set about to do it fast, because I knew I was only going to do it for 4 years. So
why? What was the 4-year limit?
I didn't want to be a lifetime public servant. This was a kind of one-off opportunity. I didn't think it would take longer than 4 years. And also I sort of was of the view that part of the genius of Ofcom in its initiation was it was not full of the usual suspects. And therefore, I used to say to people when I was hiring them, this isn't a lifetime job. I want you for 4 years and then you should go back and do something else. So it brought in a lot of new blood.
Yep.
And I think we did something quite different.
So fast isn't a word that is often linked to government initiatives,
Yeah.
but arguably really should be. Do you
sure.
Yeah. Do you think there are obvious changes that governments could make if they were brave enough to do it to ensure that level of pace happened again?
Oh, for sure they could. You've just got to have a mandate. I mean, it's a bit chicken and egg. I'm not saying it's easy. I mean, I had 3 windows into public service, one serving a term as a regulator. You have a lot of authority as a regulator. Some people would argue too much. You're answerable to Parliament, to both houses. But, you know, and obviously you're answerable to your board. But if you've got domain expertise, you know what you're doing, and indeed you're doing some version of the right thing, by and large, you can have a big impact. Then I worked as a special advisor to a prime minister. There, it depends upon the power of the prime minister's office at the time. And then I became a minister. Actually, when you're a minister, you have quite a lot of authority. And my experience is that the civil service machine will take guidance if you know what you want to do.
So do we just not have the right leaders?
What, are we talking now or generally?
In the public sector?
Look, I think there's a generic challenge for Europe. You know, that's not a EC point, it's a geographical point.
Yeah.
That the structure of European public policy was largely framed in 1946, and absent certain moments of spike change, you know, Thatcherism probably, the falling of the wall, the end of the Cold War, the trend line has been pretty consistent. And meanwhile, so if you think of the globe, you've got the rest of the world and then you've got Europe. The rest of the world has changed beyond recognition since 1945. I mean, like, unrecognizable. I now spend my life in the rest of the world. But Europe really has sort of iterated forwards from 1945 for understandable reasons.
Yeah.
But actually, it doesn't really add up anymore. And so you've got this balance between pace, productivity, and cost and entitlement. It's very hard to break and very hard for that to add up. In fact, it doesn't add up. We know it doesn't add up.
So we have amazing young scholars, as you know, all over the world. If you were advising them of which part of the world to go and make their careers in, or just have incredibly fulfilling lives, where would you suggest that they base themselves now?
Well, you know, Marshall McLuhan was right. The world is a village. So I would say, you know, travel the world. You know, I would engage in the world.
Yeah.
Because there's so much to learn depending on where you are in the world and how you look at opportunity X or problem Y. So I think, you know, be curious, scan, you know, understand different cultural approaches to the same question, because then you'll become a bit less determinative in your answers. As to where to go geographically, well, language matters. It's hard to be really compelling in a language that's not yours, I think. We're a bit lucky in the United Kingdom because English is a kind of lingua franca of the internet, or some version of English is. So that gives us a sort of a disproportionate advantage. And then there are obvious points about, you know, there are some markets that are a bit more buoyant. The other day I got a thank you letter from a godson who I'd sent a birthday present to. Lovely thank you letter. He turned 18. And in it, he said, I'm now at a point in my life where I need some advice on what I'm going to do. And my father, who years and years previously had used to work, my father always used to say, one of your great pieces of advice to him was, if you see a sinking ship, jump on it, because that's where the real opportunities are. I remember thinking, did I really see it? But actually, I can see why I might have said that. So in other words, it's easy to follow success because it's obvious.
Yep.
But actually, if you're following success and that's your start point, that may not be the place where you can really make the biggest difference, because then it's already successful. And sometimes then people get a bit risk averse because like, well, it's working.
Yeah. And you're not challenging
So you're not challenging yourself. Now, jumping on any sinking ship that passes is a little colorful, but be exploratory. And certainly I say to my own kids, between 20 to 40, you can't really make any mistakes, but you can learn a lot.
So you can embrace risk.
Embrace risks. And that's a bit of a post-rationalization of my own career. I mean, I would say 20 to 40, I spent a lot of time doing things that were a bit, gee, what's that about?
Ofcom was a great success under your leadership. Slightly more challenged now, would you say?
Ofcom more challenged? No, I would say it's become an established thing.
Yeah.
By definition, it wasn't. It didn't exist. So when we were there, we were creating something, so it was new. Some of the constituent parts came to us, but generally we tried to reinvent those. I wouldn't say Ofcom is challenged now, but I think it's got bigger, partly because it did well. And everyone went, well, that's doing well, let's give it something else. So suddenly it got the post office, and then it got full regulation of the BBC, and then it got, and now it's doing,
all the online
harm, and then before you know where you are, you're really you're like a vehicle of government policy, rather than our brief was, Tony Blair's government brief was technology and the creative sector and is going to be the defining industry of the next 25 years. We want a framework for these industries that will make us a market leader. And we want to do the necessary things to protect consumers and users. But it was in that order. We had a big debate at the time about, are we more concerned about citizens or consumers? And the answer was, well, we're concerned about both. But the best way to protect citizens is to have a healthy and vibrant industry. Bear in mind, in 2022, if you'd arrived from Mars to the world and you'd taken a photograph, Europe was ahead of America in digital technology.
Was it?
Europe had delivered GSM technology, GSM mobile. America was still debating, this is more technical than you want. Are we going to use CDMA technology or WCDMA technology?
Yeah.
Digital cable and digital satellite television came to Europe before it came to North America.
Yeah.
They were still plug and play analog cable. The internet actually was fast. HTML was invented here. The French had Mintel. It was debatable how that was going to progress. I think I'm correct in saying that in the UK and the US simultaneously, the dial-up to broadband transition happened at the same time. And then suddenly it all went one way.
And AI now.
I mean,
it's a complete game changer.
Complete game changer. A complete game changer. Yeah, that is a real, that's a general purpose technology. And I would say even more than the internet, it's a game changer. That is like electricity or the combustion engine.
You were involved in Digital Britain. You obviously had all of the Ofcom thing. What would you, if you were advising the government on AI, or just generally other CEOs, what would you be saying about AI?
Well, I can tell you what I am saying in my own company. I'm saying that I don't think AI is going to destroy our business, but it's definitely got to make us much more efficient, much more effective, and we've got to be much more focused on, value add and innovation than on process and admin. Yeah. Because all that process and admin stuff is going to get automated and it's going to become much quicker. So we're going to become much more efficient. We're going to be much smarter. We're going to know a lot more, like a lot more. And I use it all the time. Like 20 times a day, 30 times a day. We build our own AI engine here at Informa. And I almost do nothing now where I don't then go to it and say, could you make this better? Or what about this? Or is that right? And it's still only, what are we in? Year 2, year 3? What is this, 2026? So I'm old enough to I was in the United Kingdom when we did our first broadband internet connection to a household. But that was 27 years ago. Imagine AI after 27 years. Where's it going to be? I mean,
Yeah.
It's going to redesign rafts of processes in white collar work, in administrative work, in things that you really don't need to spend human time on. So it's going to free up an enormous amount of time. So how do you use your time? So I think for the private sector and for the public sector, I think it's going to be a very exciting time to be alive. Great to be a young person at this stage.
I was going to say, what advice would you give to our scholars in terms of what they're studying or which kind of organizations they should be applying for, given the opportunities, but also the threats of AI?
Are there threats?
Jobs are going to disappear.
Sure, but jobs disappear all the time. I mean, jobs disappear all the time. My grandfather worked in the shipyards.
Yep.
Those jobs don't exist anymore. You know, some of my uncles worked in the mines. Those jobs don't exist anymore. I mean, jobs changing, I'm not sure is a big threat. I mean, I'm not casual about that, sitting where I'm sitting. I just think jobs changing is like a fact of life. So the question is...
Quantum of jobs disappearing, is that, or do you think there'll be enough new things that we just haven't thought of yet?
I think there definitely will be. And the sum of human knowledge will grow. Human beings are fantastic at projecting and creating. And if you can take out the time, the prep time or the start time, think how many projects you and I have been involved in our professional life where, you know, if you spent 100 hours on a project, like 85 of those hours have been admin and process and preparation, and 15 have been creativity.
Yeah.
Well, imagine if it's 85, 15 the other way. I mean, how much richer, how much more rewarding, how much more significant will the outcomes be? So what would be my advice to a young person? Get smarter at prompting, use all the AI engines that exist, because they're all a bit different. Yeah. I don't think you need to learn how to be a prompt engineer or be a coder, but you might want to be. Be curious and get as much experience as you can, because in the next 4 or 5 years, it's going to change a lot.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure it's a great counsel to start. I'm not saying this is your counsel, but there's a bit of a mood music around of, you know, this could be terrible. I mean, yeah, it could be, but it probably won't be.
And it'll probably be amazing.
And it'll probably be interesting. And if you're young, even if you find something that's a bit terrible, then you've got time on your hands, so then you can go and find something that isn't terrible.
We jumped right to you being CEO of Informa. I sometimes think that Informa is one of the best kept secrets in the world. FTSE 100, 3.6 billion in revenue, something like that, 14,000 employees. Why do you think not as many people know about it, or it isn't a household name in the way that some other FTSE 100 companies are? And does it matter?
Well, that's a good last question. Does it matter if you're running a company that you're visible? I don't know if it does. I do say to some people that if you're going to go into business, I think one of the things to ask yourself is, do you want to work in a B2C business or a B2B business? I mean, it's not quite as binary as that, but it is a bit. I've worked in both, and I concluded relatively early on I preferred B2B, because you generally have a more intimate relationship with your customers. Yeah. There's less of an asymmetry of knowledge, because you're dealing with knowledgeable customers who demand a certain level of knowledge. But generally, if you get it right, in return, they'll pay you a reasonable price. So there's margin in that market, which therefore means there's enough money in the system, if you're good at what you do, to invest for return and investment and development. Whereas in B2C, you've got to go to volume, because it's a one-to-many, one-to-millions. And generally, the better-known companies are the B2C, because they're household names by definition, because they've got to have a retail brand. So I think there are a number of B2B companies that are less well-known. Informa specifically, I mean, we are now, I joined the board in 2009. We're about 5 times the size of what we were then in revenue. Well, this year we'll be just over 4 billion.
Wow.
We're about a bit more than 5 times the profitability, but we're actually only 1.25 size of people.
It's a phenomenal achievement.
So we haven't made a point to be famous. My communications director, IR director, Richard, when I got the job, I said to him, I want us to be a 10-year overnight success story. So don't ask me to do any, profile interviews. Let's work out what we want to do and let's try and do it. And then let's keep doing it. And then when we've done it, then maybe we might have a story to tell. So we haven't sought profile. Does it matter? I think it does matter a bit. I think we probably at times, our lack of visibility has been a bit of an obstacle.
For what sort of thing?
Market access. Sometimes you turn up in a market and there's a bit of, well, who are you? Just remind me why am I meeting you?
Yeah.
And talent, sometimes, hiring talent, retaining talent, raising money, raising finance. You're just not on some people's radar screen. They kind of, well, I don't really understand the business model. I think those would be the main reasons.
Yeah. It only really struck me because I was mentioning to somebody that we were going to do this interview and that, I had been at Informa, and actually all of our scholars sort of owe Informa a thank you, because when Informa purchased IR, that's how Lord Laidlaw made his first fortune, which is what funds all the
key there is his first fortune.
Yeah. Well, he's a serial entrepreneur.
He's a serious fortune. He's a serial fortune maker and hunter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And people didn't know of Informa, so.
Yeah, I sort of think we're at a bit of a junction point on that. But having said that, I quite like the fact that we don't fall or die by the public narrative. And maybe to go back to where we started a bit, I don't want to personalize it just to me. I've got no interest in profile personally either. But when I was 35, I wouldn't have given the same answer. So it's not a vehicle for me.
Yeah.
And I haven't used it that way.
And is that maturity, less arrogance that you mentioned right at the beginning? What do you think? Why now does it not matter?
I don't know, it might actually be immaturity rather than maturity, actually, in that I've seen the downside of it. And I think the world's become a bit more fast to judgment. The moral outrage algorithm is fast, very fast. So if you want to live by the public sword, you can die by it very quickly. And so, I'm more wary of it. I also think if you don't go down that route, it's easier to have a broader kind of team of equals. Someone's ultimately got to be the boss. I think if you came inside Informa, I don't think anyone would say, oh, I'm not really sure who the boss is. I think most people would say Stephen runs the company. But there are a lot of peers in the company and a lot of people who exercise real responsibility at many different levels in many different places. And I think that makes us a stronger business. Certainly makes it a more enjoyable place to work. And enjoyment at work is to go back to the AI thing, what would I say to any young person is, find a place where you feel comfortable, because if you feel comfortable, you'll play better strokes.
Yeah.
And that's so true. I don't know what sports you play or any of the people.
Water polo was my sport.
But if someone then takes you to a new sport, so if you play water polo, you've got good eye-to-hand coordination, you understand coordination. But someone takes you to a new sport, you're not quite so confident, and then you sort of seize up and you don't hit the ball quite so well. And it's a bit the same at work. You tend to play better in an environment where you feel comfortable. So, and I think having high egos gets in the way of that.
You've had an extraordinary growth story, as you've just said, at Informa. And when you came in, it was very much three probably separate businesses, wasn't it? In terms of
It was, yeah.
the academic, the events, data. You doubled down on events, which was quite a bold move. What gave you the impetus to do that? And then how did you deal with COVID right in the midst of that?
Well, you're 100% right. The business then was, we were in the academic market, research market, and we were quite good at it. We weren't brilliant at it. We were quite good at it. That business was doing well. We were in the data market. We weren't very good at it, and we didn't really know how to do it. And we were in the events market, but we were in like a neighborhood of the events market, which was conferences, which you know well, where we were really good, but really the world was moving out of conferences for reasons.
Into exhibitions.
Well, I don't know if the same buyers were moving from conferences to exhibitions, but I agree with you that, you know, thousands and thousands of spot conferences were being disintermediated by Google. And trade shows was a different market, which we were in a little bit. As you know, we had 7 or 8 trade shows.
Yes.
But I think actually, as a factual matter, we had 11 in 2013. We had 11 trade shows, but we did like 12,000 conferences. Yeah. The academic business was a great business, and we're still in it, and it's a bigger business, but it was never going to be a high growth business.
It's just very steady.
It's steady.
Yeah.
Actually changes a lot, but it changes a lot, but stays in size terms steady. The data business, we did not have the wherewithal, the balance sheet, the money, the smarts to have turned Informa into a scale data business. We would have needed a balance sheet that we could never have got to.
Even being listed on.
Even being listed. No one would have lent us the money.
Yeah.
I mean, to get technical, even in those days, to buy a data business would have cost us twice our market multiple. No one was going to lend us the money. Yeah. So really, we were left with, we had scale in events, but we were in the wrong neighborhood. So yeah, we made a very conscious decision. Well, and again, this is going back to your profile question, because we weren't really known for it. We could experiment a bit there without anyone paying that much attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we decided, actually, let's get big in trade shows. Now, did we, take a 48-sheet billboard poster and say, we're going to be the world's biggest trade show company? No, but we did say, I mean, literally, we had a line, we're going to build and buy a leadership position in B2B trade shows. We did say that, even in early 2014. Everyone went, oh, okay. Now, what are you going to do here? What are you going to do here? What are you going to do? Fast forward, 12 years, we've now got 700-800 trade shows. And we are by far and away the largest player in that market. We're not in the data market in the same way. We have data businesses, but differently. And we still have our academic business. It's 2-3 times the size of what it was back then.
And this is Taylor and Francis.
It's Taylor and Francis. But that's grown. But that business grows at 4%. This business is growing at 12%.
Yeah.
You want to be a growth business, 4% is not. That's not going to light anyone's investment fire. But if you can grow it north of, 8, 9, 10, then you're a growth business.
So you have this great focus on face-to-face live experiences in events and then lockdown.
Yeah, I mean, lockdown was existential for the company in a good way and a bad way. It was existential. I mean, lockdown was terrible for all sorts of reasons we don't need to reprise. But now, 5 years after it, 6 years after it, lockdown was globally imposed prohibition. Really, if you think about it from a product point of view, no one's allowed to buy a trade show product. You can't travel, you can't meet, you can't socialize, you can't engage, you can't be close to someone. Even this probably wouldn't meet social distancing, or we'd have masks on. If you're, by that point, the world's largest trade show business, this is a pretty tricky place to be. So we had how do we survive that, and will it come back, and how did we finance a year where we lost a lot of money, and that was tricky. We could go through that, but let's just say we survived that. That's a very shorthand way of summarizing what was an extraordinary period.
You partly survived though because you acted quickly.
We moved fast, and I recycled lessons from my NTL experience and my government experience. My NTL experience was don't end up being controlled by your debt burdens. So we went fast to equity and we over-raised in equity, and then we repurchased all of our debt. So no one was telling us what to do.
Yeah.
And that I think, I mean, I can say this now, that was unquestionably the thing that saved the company. The second thing is we didn't take any government money. We took no government money, we furloughed nobody, we fired nobody.
It's a phenomenal achievement.
At the time, it was a risky lineup. But if you take government money, government's going to tell you, you had my money, you had taxpayers' money, so I'd like to tell you what to do with your business. Not unreasonable. If you fire lots of people, you've then got to rehire them because you don't have them. And if you furlough people, then you've got to bring them back.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different cultural change. So those were really the twin peaks of our decisions. Go fast, go early, control your own destiny, and don't rely on the government and don't fire people if you can find a way of paying them, which we could just. And then fortunately the world started to come back. And then when it came back,
you were perfectly positioned.
We were better positioned than everybody else. We had raised money, and some would say we over-raised. It didn't feel like over-raising at the time. I'd like to say we knew this was going to happen. We didn't. But we over-raised, and that then meant we went on a buying spree when other businesses were still underpriced because their value had come off, because during COVID no one could buy the product, so prices came down. And that then allowed us to further accelerate our growth. So it was a terrible experience. It was a very testing experience, and at times traumatic, but actually net, it worked to our advantage. That's actually what happened. When the history books are written, that was a step change moment for the company. And now, 5-6 years on, I think people now understand what we're doing. Those shareholders who have been with us since 2014 now feel that, they deserve some credit for having come in early, and they do. And it's also allowed us to internationalize the company in a much bigger way. So we're a much more diverse company than we were geographically.
You're based in Dubai now most of the time, aren't you?
I'm based out of Dubai.
Okay. Because that region is where you see growth? Or?
Well, here's an interesting stat. I was having this conversation with someone over the weekend because we're closing a deal in that part of the world at the moment. And this year in 2026, if we get this deal done that we're doing, which I'm pretty sure we will, our revenues in that region will be $1 billion. And when I joined this company on the board, our revenues weren't $1 billion.
No.
Period. Anywhere in the world.
That's what I was just thinking.
So
that's phenomenal.
So that area of the world right now, to go back to your question about if you're a young person right now, where in the world would you go? There's absolutely no doubt. If you look at the trade routes, the expansion of the trade routes, Southeast Asia through India into the Gulf region and Africa, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, India. I mean, it's extraordinary what's going on in these markets. So it's an exciting place to be. And our product, the trade show, and a high-end, impactful B2B physical event, it's material to countries that are building industry verticals, they're trying to build supply chains, they're trying to create greater levels of foreign direct investment. So we're in the right spot. And we've now, this goes back to your profile question too. You should do this for a living. These are good questions. We've got a bit more confident in our profile. And so now we have a bit of a calling card.
Yeah. So
I can turn up and say, we signed a deal with the Ethiopian government on Tuesday. Okay, so you want to open up this market. Well, why don't you work with the largest player in the market? Here's what we bring: money, capital, talent, brands, licenses. What can we do together? And we've had that conversation now in 5 or 6 different places. I couldn't have dreamt. I mean, when I started this job, I can tell you, I used to go places in the world, I couldn't get meetings with anyone. People wouldn't, well, who are you?
Yeah.
It's my job is night and day in 2026 to what it was in 2016.
Because doors open now. Because
the doors open. We've got some credibility. We've learned a lot more about what the product is. The product's better. It's more data rich. It's more informed. It's less dependent upon creative genius. It's still got content in it, but it's content and commerce as a combination rather than the kind of whimsical wit and judgment of an individual.
I love the way you talk about championing specialists, because I think particularly in today's world, that idea of specialisms and expertise is so important.
100% agree. I mean, go back to your point about AI. When we were kids, my mother had this book called Questions and Answers. Still, I can visualize this book. And when we'd sit down for tea or dinner, before we sit down, she'd say, right, everyone's got to answer 10 questions. And she'd ask us these questions like, what was the name of the man who first walked across the Niagara Falls on a wire? It's like, who needs to know this stuff? Name me the American presidents from George Washington onwards. I mean, who needs to remember all this stuff? What are the first lines of Shakespeare's 10 most favorite sonnets? And it was because general knowledge was a sign of intelligence.
Yeah.
Now, who needs general knowledge? She can get it in a heartbeat. But specialist expertise, that's very different. So the world has gone deep rather than broad. Who crossed the...
Yeah.
I can't remember. Let's ask ChatGPT or Alicia. So our position on specialism, I think that combined with the markets we're in, investors often say to me, well, should I be worried that something's going to come along that's going to disintermediate your business? Fancy word for, is your business going to get destroyed or changed, wiped out? It's a question, if you're talking to young people, it's a question that investors often ask them. I'm going to give you your money, my money, to help you grow your business. What should I worry about that might make your business, however well you run it, disappear? And our basic thesis is the two things that we are double betting on, we've double clicked on, are that face-to-face interaction is always going to be valuable. And the second is that the world is more interested in specialist smarts than general knowledge.
Yeah.
That's our sort of market insight. And I think those two things have served us really well, really well.
I've asked you loads of questions about your leadership style, but you've worked with prime ministers, you travel around the world. Are there any leaders that you particularly admire, or just traits of the best leaders that you've seen that you could summarize?
There are so many people who I could say, let's take the one that you and I share. Irvin Laidlaw. He's a remarkable person.
Yeah.
Discipline, delivery, curiosity, steel.
Yes.
All of those things.
Pace.
No, I think I've been very fortunate. But again, a bit to your question earlier, I've always wanted to learn from people. And I have found that generally successful people are keen to mentor other people. They're keen to share their experience. They actually don't want to keep it to themselves. They actually want to share it. The best of them do. So, traits, I always say, be a generous boss. I don't mean by that give people lots of money, although that's nice too, you can do it. But, be generous on credit, be generous on thanks, be generous on opportunity. I think that's a trait I've seen work well. You have to, if you're going to become responsible, people have to have a sense that your character and your judgment will meet the moment. That's really a good essence of leadership, I think. Because in the ultimate leadership position, it really doesn't boil down to process work. It boils down to, here are a set of circumstances. What's your judgment? My judgment is, I don't want to take any government money. I don't want to fire people. I spent 9 years building this company. Why would I want to fire 40% of the companies and then have to rehire them? Why would I want to do that? So I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
That's a judgment. But don't confuse that responsibility with the belief that somehow or other you're different from everybody. You have a different set of responsibilities, but you're not a different, i.e. better human being or better person. So some version of, I don't know, as my mother would say, don't become the big I am.
So some humility.
Humility is sort of I was going to say humility, but I mean perspective.
Yeah.
Because actually the reverse of responsibility is you're responsible for a lot of other people. So you don't want to get it wrong.
Yeah. So there's an accountability.
There's an accountability. And I think that's a trait that I've seen in people. And then stamina. I always think stamina and resilience when you read leadership books or you hear people, it's not the punches you land, it's the punches you take. And then how much they take out of you. When you go home at night and you've had a bad day, or maybe you've overstepped the mark, and maybe instead of sleeping for 7 hours, you sleep for 3 because it keeps you awake, and you're replaying that meeting. And did I quite get that right? Or was that exchange wrong? But, the more responsibility you get, you might have 20 of those in a day. If that's taking a lot out of you, every one of those punches, you won't last very long.
Yeah.
So stamina and resilience, those are much underrated.
It's really interesting because that feeds directly into the quote. We have this tradition on the lab. The last guest asks a question for the next guest. And Professor Irene Tracy, who's the Vice Chancellor of the University of Oxford, said, what do you do to relax? So how do you build space into an incredibly busy schedule so that you do have the stamina and the resilience to keep going?
Well, I think you have to diary exercise, not do exercise. I think if you've got a very, very busy life where ultimately your time is a commodity within your organization or your job, if I'm allocating Susanna's time and I've only got 12 hours of it a day, and I could really do with 36 hours, you really have to diary exercise. I think it's impossible not to do that and still have a means of decompressing. I read. Reading is probably my escape point.
What's the best book you've read recently?
The best book I've read recently? I'm reading a great book at the moment. I wouldn't say it's the best book, but it's the one that I've got in my Kindle at the moment. I'm reading, it's been around for a long time, but I've never read it. I've always wanted to read it. It's called Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. Have you read it?
No.
It's a very good book.
Oh, what?
And it's essentially a story about the women in France in the Second World War who chose to become part of the resistance rather than not.
Oh, fascinating.
And it's really, A, I'm interested in history, B, I'm interested in France, and C, as happened in wartime, because the men were all gone, the women became responsible for everything. And so that was a big change in social structures. So it's interesting for lots of reasons. Yeah. And then in a more sort of business way, I'm actually reading a book about benign leaders and toxic leaders and the difference. I'm not so sure about that, but it's revealing. So I would say exercise, reading, and then try and maintain your friendships if you can, where you're not, you're the person rather than the job.
What would you like to ask our next guest?
Am I allowed to say it's the beginning of a year? So,
of course.
Well, it's the beginning of a year. So here's a question for the next guest. In a world where maybe sometimes in the commentary there's a bit more about what could go wrong than what could go right, how do we dial up the optimism register? That's what I would say. I had my first executive meeting of the company at the beginning of the year. And as I've done now for quite a few years, I start the exec meeting in January at the end with, okay, so where is everyone on the optimism register? 1 is, oh my gosh, it's going to be terrible. And 10 is, yippity-doo, it's going to be fantastic. And then we just go around the table, and you've got to be somewhere between 1 to 10, or possibly 0 to 10. And then we end up with an average, and that's where we see where we get to at the end of the year. I think the world could do with a little bit more framing on the possible.
Yeah.
Sure, there may be threats in AI, but it could transform the sum of human knowledge and the speed of human knowledge and the democratization of that knowledge. What's not to like about that? On energy transition, we're making enormous strides on energy transition at a real pace. In education, we're in the education market. I read a report this week that said by 2030, there'll be 65 million new graduates coming out of universities and educational institutions in Southeast Asia, India, China, the Middle East and Africa. Net growth in wisdom and learning and smarts. You know, generally speaking, sure, there are conflicts in the world at the moment which are tragic, but given there are 9 or 10 billion people in the world, most people in the world are rubbing along with each other pretty well. And generally, there's more tolerance, more adaptation, more forgiveness, more flexibility, less prejudice. You know, the trend line on those things is generally good. So question, how do we dial up I'm not suggesting we all have to become Tigger, but how do we dial up the optimism register rather than start with the what could go wrong?
I love that. And in fact, our Christmas wish for the foundation was that everybody leans into hard-edged hope.
Yeah, it's good.
So not
hard-edged hope, not sort of wishful thinking,
no,
but
not fluffy optimism,
but hard-edged hope. I think, and when you see that, and as we were discussing earlier, it's one of the things I like about where I'm spending a lot of my time at the moment is that I'm struck by how most of the people I meet think that tomorrow is going to be better than yesterday for them and for their kids and for their communities, for their countries. And many of these countries are coming out of some dark times or some challenging times in the really quite recent, you know, past. So that'd be the question I put. Who are you interviewing next?
Don't know yet.
Right.
It's a great place to finish. Stephen, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.